Okay, before we head over to the editor, there's a couple of things that we um, always forget. Good at forgetting things. We wanted to, after we set our widget controller, um, one of the things that we just finished setting up was what to do was to broadcast our initial values. So from our HUD, after we've set our overlay widget controller, we now want to have that widget controller to broadcast those values. So that's why we put that comment in there to remind us. So let's do our widget controller. And now we can call our broadcast initial values. And then we can have it added to the viewport. So that was one thing that we needed to do. But if you recall, we were about to create a library system when I figured out that we hadn't even had an overlay yet to have a purpose to do this. Um, and so let's work on that. So in our .h file for this, we want to create a pure blueprint function. I think the reason for this is that it ultimately is going to save us some casting and stuff in the blueprint and keep things a little bit more decoupled. So I'm going to make a public section. And this one's actually going to be for the getters because it's all that's in here. So I'm going to make a note here that this is called from within widget blueprint. Okay, so it's going to be a U function. It is going to be blueprint pure. And we can put it in a category. Put it in HFX ability system library and with a subsection of widget controller. Okay, and this function is going to be static and it's going to return a type of view overlay widget controller pointer, and it'll be a get, we'll call it get overlay widget controller, and it's going to need a world object. So U object and call it world context object. And it doesn't know what a U overlay widget controller is. So we can forward declare that. Then that's happy. Now we can implement this. And what's going to happen here? Well, a few things, I guess. We know that to return a widget controller or to in our get widget controller in our HUD, right? Get overlay widget controller, it wanted one of these controller params. And so that's where we're going to kind of lead ourselves. So I'm going to just leave that last return there for a second. And I'm going to just start with what if we were to return from our HFX HUD, and that's where we have our get overlay widget controller, and it wanted a widget controller params input. None of this stuff's known, but that's okay. So let's back this up one, and let's do a HFX HUD, and we're going to say that's equal to, that's going to be an AHFX HUD, right? Because that's what our base, it's what, it's here somewhere. It's a actor, HFX HUD. So we need to include that. So let's do that. And that is in our UI UI HFX HUD.h. Lost my close quote there. So now we got that thing. So that's it's going to solve one of our problems. And way that we can get that is through the player controller. It has a get HUD function. So, and we know that we need the player controller for our widget controller params. So we need a player controller. Pointer, we'll call it PC for player controller. And that's going to equal so there's a get player controller that we can get, I guess, from the world context object. So just from the world. So from the, I guess, the active world. Sure, let's go with that. That's in out of gameplay statics, though, apparently. I don't know a lot of things, but I'm slowly trying. I'm going to include Kismet forward slash gameplay statics.h. So if we go into that gameplay statics, and then there should be a get player controller, and it wants a world context object. And we know that we're passing one in up here, right? So we can just use that. So it's world context object. And then which player index? Well, the active player is of the local player is always player 0. And so that is that. Oops. I put that on the wrong line. Let me just move that up here. Okay. Player controller, gameplay statics. So now we have a player controller. And what we want to make sure of is that that player controller is valid, right? Because down here now, okay, let me just finish this. So to cast to our HUD, we can cast to our AHFX HUD, And what would we cast? Well, we would cast from our player controller. We have a get HUD function that's built in. And so we don't want this to fail. Well, if we don't want it to fail badly. So we'll wrap our player controller in an if statement. So we'll go if all of this, right? Get rid of that thing for now. And then we'll put this stuff inside there. So I'm going to cut that from here and paste here. So if we don't have a valid player controller, we're going to be just falling out with a null pointer. So inside here, we've now got an access to our HUD. And so now we've got access to this this function. And now we just need to build this widget controller param. So let's do that. So it can be constant, and it's going to be an f widget controller param, and it's a widget controller params, and it needed to take, well, it needed to take the 4 items, right? And we know them to be the player controller, the player state, and the ability system component, and the attribute set, right? Well, a lot of that doesn't work, right? This is an incomplete type, and we can get that from our widget controller base class, right? So if I look at my base widget controller, that's where we've defined our widget controller params. So let's include that. So we'll include our, and that's in UI, it's HFX widget controller. Oops. .h. Now it knows what this is. So it knows what the player controller is. We've got that. It doesn't have a player state. So the player state is something we can get from the player controller. So we want a HFX player state, which it doesn't know what that is. So we need to include our HFX player state. Let's do that. And that is in player HFX player state.h. And we'll call this one pointer to that player state. And that is equal to our player controller. And we can get player state from it. And it's a template function, so we can have it return it to us in the proper value. So that's a HFX player state. And so that's that item. And we've in our on off of our player state, right? We've got our get ability system component function that we've added to that. So we want to use ability system component pointer ASC, and that's going to be coming from our player state because we've got our get ability system component that we've put in. And now we just need the attribute set. Well, our attribute set we can also get from our player state. So it's a U attribute set there, AS. And we can get that from our player state, yet attribute set. Okay, so now we've constructed all of our controller parameters, and now we should be able to return the widget controller for the overlay widget. We should be able to return the overlay widget controller. Okay, and if so, if this has not been set, then it will just return a null pointer. So I don't mind all of this in here. It's fine. And I'm going to save that, save everything. Okay. And yeah, so I'm going to just clean this a little bit here. I think that's all I wanted to do at this point. So that should be able to get us that open, and we should be able to do something. So let's, I'm going to build this, and that might take a moment or two. So I'm going to pause my video.